The book of Ben Sira uses a very typical image of God, calls on that, trusts on that the Lord is the judge, and with him is no partiality. And of course, this would seem to be a good thing. We praise even the statue above courts of justice is the virtue of justice with a blindfold, because justice is blind. We often say, it's reiterated, we hear it to exhort this idea, this ideal, that no one is above the law. And this means that wealth or influence makes no impression, and particularly on the righteous judge, as St. Paul calls God. Judgment in this way will be based on the facts of the case, and one would assume that God knows all the facts. No secrets are hidden from him, as the prophet Ezekiel says. So even then, a plea of otherwise good behavior would not mitigate or persuade. This is Ezekiel again. Though I say to the righteous that he shall surely live, yet if he trusts in his righteousness and does injustice, none of his righteous deeds shall be remembered. But in his injustice that he has done, he shall die. Does the absence then of partiality seem such a good thing after all? A lack of partiality, which you could call a lack of favour or grace, on this account appears cold, unforgiving, merciless. And this makes justice something to dread. For if God knows all the facts, then he knows, as we do, that the judgment will always be condemnation. The verdict will always be guilty, since, as St. Paul says, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. So why does Ben Sira praise God for his lack of partiality and for his speedy declaration of judgment? The Lord will not delay in executing judgment. For us, remember that the context for Ben Sira is not dread, but longing for justice, longing to have the opportunity to set a case before a righteous judge. Because we must remember that for most of social history, and even still today, access to courts and arbitration, even a legal process, were beyond the majority of people, especially the poor, the widow, the orphan. Most people had little recourse to what was an elite administrative system, privileging those who can afford it. And this can take different forms, whether you can afford it. Yes, of course, wealth and influence, but also simply having the time to pursue cases, the leisure to be literate, the influence and means to ensure a favourable outcome. Prophet Amos condemns this, as many of the prophets do. You trample on the poor and exact taxes of grain from him. You who afflict the righteous, who take a bribe and turn aside the needy in the gate. These prophets frequently condemn a system that exploits a needy majority who can never get justice. And this society produces the wry proverb, to show partiality is not good, but for a piece of bread a man will do wrong. It's Proverbs 28:21. So the Old Testament appeal to an impartial God who hears the cry of the poor is not concerned with people who are fleeing judgment, the unrighteous, but rather those who seek it. Seek justice so that they might be acquitted from corruption. They might get back what has been stolen or defrauded them. Justice so that they might be vindicated. Remember, again, the words of the prophet Isaiah we hear so often. He has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and release to prisoners. The Bible's prophetic writings are confident that God will not be persuaded by anything but the truth. Jesus takes this up. Whatever you have said in the dark shall be heard in the light, and what you have whispered in private rooms shall be proclaimed on the housetops. We can understand this as another way of expressing this plea or this image of Ben Sira. The prayer of the humble pierces the clouds because the truth will not be hidden. So when we then turn to Luke's parable, evaluating the contrast between the tax collector and the Pharisee raises the uncomfortable question of which side of the court we expect to be when the poor appeal to the judge. Despite the Pharisees' confidence, Jesus' denial of his justification declares him guilty. At the same time, the tax collector enters this plea himself. So the contrast is not who fears and who seeks judgment, or nor who bears the guilt. If we seek judgment, we must also be prepared to acknowledge the judgment. We are all like other men. The contrast then that Jesus praises in the tax collector is who acknowledges their need for mercy. But then finally, how does one persuade an impartial judge? This parable of Jesus teaches us a new way of understanding what it means for God to show no partiality. If there is nothing about you that can influence God's judgment, then there is also nothing about you that will exclude you from God's mercy. God, being rich in mercy, because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, made us alive together with Christ. By grace you have been saved,